and then we can upload.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Earth Exchange Café for December of 2024, our last cafe of the year. So in the Northern Hemisphere, it's cold, we hope, because that's what's appropriate for the seasons. And in the Southern Hemisphere, it's the middle of summer. So we invite you into this cafe wherever you are, because it's a cafe, it's a virtual cafe. So no matter where you are, you're here with friends and colleagues and all kinds of interesting activities and records of activities. So we hope you have your hot drink here, your tea or coffee or chocolate, and that you can settle down at a table and pull your chair up and know that surrounding you are all kinds of interesting people who are artists, activists, environmentalists, people who do music and art, people who are thinking about the earth and how we live on it in interesting and insightful ways. There are paintings and photographs on the wall and music playing. And it's it's a place that's both welcoming and comforting at the same time. So we welcome you, and we're very excited today to have our guest, Will Falk, and to introduce him and to lead off the discussion. Here is Harry Sams.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing Will Falk, who is a writer, a poet, a lawyer, an environmental activist. And we'll talk more about the poetry publications and your lawyer work, your legal work, as well as the environmental activism that I think, works through all of your offerings and your creativity. But before we get into that, I just want to welcome you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, you're so welcome to share a little bit about yourself if people don't know who you are.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. This is a really cool project that y'all have been doing, and it's an honor to be someone that you're speaking to. Yeah, I always call myself a biocentric lawyer, activist, and poet. And by biocentric, I mean life-centered. I throughout my work, I try and honor the fact that we share this amazing planet with countless other creatures who have as much right to live and as much right to thrive as humans do. And so my environmental work is really always on the side of the land, on the side of nature, as opposed to privileging the experience or the lives of some or a few humans. I try to approach my work in several different ways. As a lawyer, I have access to the mechanisms of power in which the natural world, decisions about the natural world are made by the American government, at least. And as a poet, while sometimes you cannot convince people to love the natural world rationally or intellectually, sometimes we need an alternate path to the human heart. And I try to use my poetry in service of the natural world and to try and help people fall in love with the natural world. My work is very much, I try and focus on the front lines. I try and go out to places that are under direct threat and try and directly oppose or even confront the harm that threatens so much of the natural world today.
Wow. Wow. There's so much in that feels very powerful and full of meaning and intention. And it's just wonderful to know that we're going to spend about an hour sort of unpicking that. Before I get into that, I'm curious about where in your life, in your youth maybe, Where was that point in where you maybe made that really crucial decision about what it was to live as an enmeshed being with other beings on this planet?
Well, I was really lucky to have parents that really encouraged us and even forced us sometimes to be outside, as long as the weather wasn't terrible. A lot of my childhood, my mom, turned me and my little sister outside and said, come back at dinner time. I'll let you know when you can come back. And so I spent a lot of my childhood out in the woods, out in the natural world, and uh, that really helped me fall in love with the natural world. But I think really where my commitment to protecting as much of the natural world as I can started was when in 2013, so 11 years ago, I tried to kill myself. I was I was a young lawyer. I was my first job out of law school was as a what in the States is called a public defender. So a government attorney that represents poor people who couldn't afford an attorney otherwise, who have been accused of crime. And I found that work to be incredibly difficult. Um, not just not just the sort of human behaviors that you encounter through that kind of work, but just the sheer stress of the work. I had to take 3 cases a day to meet my government mandated quotas. I was spending 5, 6, 7 hours a day in court. And my other hours were spent in jails and prisons meeting with my clients. And that sort of very fast pace where someone's liberty literally was depending upon my ability to practice law in the right way was just put a lot of pressure and stress on me. I was diagnosed with major depression as a younger man, and that really exacerbated that. So after attempting to take my own life, I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is in the upper Midwest of the United States. It's a city that's right on Lake Michigan, one of the Great Lakes. And I happened to have an apartment just a few blocks from Lake Michigan, and I was able to every morning go out and spend time with Lake Michigan. Um, I People don't ever believe me, but I found this big kind of boulder or stone, that this red granite stone that was shaped exactly like a therapy couch, like the classic therapy couch. And I would go out there and lay on the stone therapy couch, and listen to Lake Michigan, listen to her waves breaking, listen to the insects and the birds and the children playing, listen to the breeze in the trees over Lake Michigan. And that was the best medicine I found to help me get out of my own anxiety and depression. In a lot of ways, it was sort of a simple mindfulness technique, but I learned several things from that. One of the things that I learned is that the natural world can save my life and can save my life every day. Um, and from that, it wasn't a very far step to realize that the natural world has given me my life and continues to give me my life. And making those realizations caused me deep gratitude. And I decided then that just like the natural world gives and saves my life and continues to do so, I would devote my life to trying to protect as much of the natural world's life as I possibly could. Um, and so I kind of made a vow almost to do that. And from that time, it took me a little while to kind of get everything in order. I kind of gave away all my possessions and moved out of the apartment and set out for the front lines of different environmental campaigns. And one of the first places that took me to was an indigenous cultural center and pipeline blockade up in central British Columbia in Canada. It's on the land of the Unist'ot'en clan of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation. And there are right now, I think, 6 pipelines threatening to cross their land from the Fort McMurray tar sands. I don't know if listeners or viewers have ever, researched that, but go and look at it and you'll see, literal Mordor kind of scenes. But through that experience and seeing how the Unist'ot'en clan was able to leverage their few resources to confront these multi-billion-dollar projects, and in fact keep those projects at bay, keep those pipelines from crossing their land, I realized that if we got really strategic and we really thought about things, many of us have more resources than peoples like the Unist'ot'en clan. And if we could really leverage those resources, we could protect a lot of land. And I've been doing that kind of thing ever since.
Wow. Oh, it feels really powerful that the couch, the therapy couch was this holding space, this giving the lake, giving you back to yourself. And then the first thing that you did was you went to that stark landscape where the people taught you something further, something more about actually what is it about being in right relationship to land? What is it about love, managing resources, all of those things, and then your expertise becomes not a burden and a terrible, thing that caused you so much stress, but in fact, it turns into this huge gift. That's just such a beautiful, powerful story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
yeah, yeah. So, I'm really curious about where that's moved you to now, and I'd love you to talk a little bit about the Thacker Pass lithium mine experience, because when we met on another conference of last year, that was absolutely very much at the forefront of your activity. So would you share with us a little bit about your work with the Thacker Pass landscape?
Yeah, my my work with to try and protect
Oh,
Thacker Pilper, who is an amazing community organizer and writer. And he was working on a book kind of debunking some of the claims of so-called green energy. And while working on that book, he read about this massive lithium mine that was sort of was proposed for this beautiful mountain pass in northern Nevada. Max and I have both spent a lot of time in what is called the Great Basin in the United States. That's most of Nevada, parts of Western Utah, parts of Eastern California, parts of Southern Oregon. And this is sort of your classic, what people think of as high desert. I think the official term for it is sagebrush steppe, actually. But Max actually went out there in the fall of 2020, and during sort of a friend's Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving in the States is at the end of November, and he was telling me about Thacker Pass, and he was saying, I really want to do something about this. What do you think? And I had been a part of actually an ongoing campaign in Hawaii where a massive telescope construction threatens the peak of Mauna Kea, which is one of the most sacred places in the world to Native Hawaiians. And I was there in 2015 on Mauna Kea when the construction equipment, the cops came with the construction equipment to try and force their way up the mountain to build that telescope. And something like 2,000 Native Hawaiians showed up, blockaded the one road up there, and the construction was never allowed to start. And to this day, that telescope still has not been built. So I was asking Max, I kind of knew that Thacker Pass must be pretty remote. And he said, yeah, there's really only one main road that you could get construction equipment to the mine. Um, so I'll back up and kind of explain Thacker Pass to kind of set the stage. Um, Thacker Pass is this beautiful mountain pass that is bounded on the north and south side by these really picturesque mountain ranges. Um, it is primarily what's called old growth sagebrush steppe. So a lot of people are familiar with old growth forests. Well, sagebrush, a sagebrush plant that is 4 or 5 foot tall, could be 125, 150 years old. And there is a such thing as old growth sage. Old growth sagebrush steppe is very important habitat for lots and lots of species. The first are a lot of small plants that live around sagebrush. And sagebrush are known as a keystone species. Sagebrush actually, I found this fascinating, actually send out sort of chemical messages to these smaller plants whenever there's danger around. And so in so many ways, sagebrush is like this lookout for other plant life in the area. But sagebrush, there are certain species like pronghorn antelope that pretty much only eat sagebrush. Pronghorn antelope are an iconic American species whose populations have been decimated since the arrival of Europeans in the region. Other species like mule deer. There's also another iconic species called greater sage grouse, which if you're not familiar with greater sage grouse, I highly recommend you look them up. They're a beautiful bird. And they have this very distinct mating ritual, and they have this sort of blood pouch on their chest, the males do, that makes this kind of beating sound, and it's like this drumming sound. And just, I was lucky enough to visit what they call a lek, a sage grouse mating area, to hear the sagebrush ritual, and it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. It's also Thacker Pass. It is known as Pahimaha in the local Paiute dialect there. And Pahimaha was actually the site of 2 massacres of Paiute people. One was a pre-European massacre that is remembered in Paiute oral traditions. And then the other was a September 12th, 1865 massacre where American soldiers attacked a peaceful Paiute camp in Thacker Pass and murdered at least 31 men, women, and children. I say at least because the soldiers noted in their records that they didn't bother to actually go around and count the bodies. They just left them lay there where they were murdered. So it's a very sacred place, especially to indigenous peoples. So it also, unfortunately, happens to be in one of the most lithium-rich regions in the whole world. And lithium is right now is a necessary ingredient for electric car batteries. And they want to put a 18,000 square acre mine on top of Thacker Pass. They want to dig an open pit that would be 400 feet deep, and several, I think it's something like 100 acres in total. The first pit, they'll dig more once they get more permits, but that would be the first one. It's very water intensive. And it's also very fossil fuel intensive. So a lot of people, when they hear about the Thacker Pass campaign and about our opposition to it, they think we're like climate deniers or something. Um, but if it's wrong to dig open pit mines for coal, I don't understand why it's not wrong to dig open pit mines for other sorts of minerals. But the Thacker Pass lithium mine, just to extract the lithium, will emit over 150,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions every year. That's equivalent to a small town. It will require burning something like 12,000 gallons of diesel on site every single day. And the lithium leaching process actually requires sulfuric acid. And the main market for the sulfur necessary for that is from oil refineries. So if we're talking about, you know, right now, as all this new so-called green energy is coming online, we're not actually seeing it replace fossil fuels. It's just becoming another energy source that is globally going on top of fossil fuels. Probably because you have to burn fossil fuels to extract so much of the stuff needed for green energy. But even if it couldn't replace fossil fuels if it depends upon the whole fossil fuel infrastructure to extract. And of course, people need to understand that lithium is a tiny ingredient in an electric car battery, which is a small ingredient of an electric car. And all of that requires the same fossil fuel intensive manufacturing processes like steel manufacturing, plastic manufacturing, glass manufacturing, synthetic rubber manufacturing. So Max and I decided to start a protest encampment on the site of the Thacker Pass lithium mine, right where they want to put the open pit on January 15th, 2021, the same day that the federal government issued all of the permits for the mine. We set up a protest camp, and we essentially had two goals. We wanted to stop the Thacker Pass mine, understanding that is very difficult to do, especially, I won't get into this, but American public lands laws, mining is the highest and best use of American public lands, according to Congress and the Supreme Court. So the use of mining trumps even indigenous cultural uses on the land.
Yeah. Sorry, that it's so many layers to what you're already saying, and you know, coming to that decision with Max about setting up that protest camp. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about what then moves you to stay there? What's it like at Thacker Pass right now? You know, what's the biodiversity? What's the soul and spirit of the land like? Could you describe that to us?
Yeah, Thacker Pass really, well, I guess one of the main reasons, or one of the things that we really wanted to do when we set up camp, was to help people fall in love with Thacker Pass. Max is a fantastic photographer and writer. I write, you know, do a lot of creative writing. So we wanted to introduce people to Thacker Pass, essentially. And I started out with the question, I wanted to ask Thacker Pass, who are you and what do you need? And when I asked Thacker Pass, who are you? I learned about all the creatures that she supports. I learned about all the groundwater that she holds. I learned about the way that Western meadowlarks sing from sagebrush. I learned about the way she smells when rain falls on sagebrush. I learned about what it's like to camp and hear coyotes singing in all directions around you. I learned about what it's like to be 15 yards away from a rattlesnake who is rattling and saying, "Hey, I'm over here. Please walk around." I learned that Thacker Pass, like I think every place, truly has a soul, truly has a spirit. And the spirit is composed of all the beings that live there, is composed of the land. Just like you or I wouldn't want someone to carve an open pit in our chest, Thacker Pass doesn't want someone to carve an open pit in her chest.
Oh, excuse me, my dogs.
Well, while you're doing, if you have an interruption, I have a question, because in something I was reading of yours, Will, you spoke about how the land doesn't want these incursions, these wounds inflicted on it. And it's a question, creating radical joy for hard times. It's about finding and making beauty in wounded places. And so it's a question I've asked a lot of people and thought a lot about, is, does the land really have an objection to these kinds of to these kinds of, well, what we would think of as incursions or wounds? Or is that our human projection about it?
I absolutely believe that the land objects to destruction, to being wounded. I think that it's I mean, one way to think about this, if we're only going to be human centric about it, is our intellect, our consciousness is created by the land. We cannot have a consciousness without the food we eat and the water we drink to form our brains, to form our bodies, to form our whole nervous system. So even just the fact that we feel that wound, that we feel that pain and despair, to me is proof that the land feels something similar. We are a product of the land. We are the land. And so when it hurts us, it also hurts the land. But again, this comes more through my sort of more metaphoric understandings, not necessarily a completely rational understanding of the land. But I lived in Thacker Pass for most of a year, and a lot of that time it was mostly just me and Max. So I had plenty of time to go out and simply be with Thacker Pass. And I went one time while I was out there, I went to where some uranium prospectors actually had dug a big pit in a test pit to try and find uranium in Thacker Pass. And while I sat there and just asked Thacker Pass, what does this feel like? You know, what do you need me to know about this place? I really felt a deep-seated pain within my own belly, within my own body. And it just seemed so obvious to me that how would any of us like it if someone came and flayed our skin off of us, then removed the muscle and then drilled into the bone to try and take the minerals that actually exist in our bodies too? That would be horrifying for us. And
I think there's something about what you're saying, which then leads to the question about your creativity with your poetry. And as you speak, what I'm hearing is this absolute affirmation that the poetry that you have produced, and I'd love you to describe a little bit more about your publications, it feels like it's coming from the voice of the land speaking through you. And I wonder if is that I've read a little bit of your poetry, and as a reader I feel that. So I wonder whether you can describe what it's like to be that poet. What's the process? Excuse me. Is that a correct assumption, that it is as much the voice of the land as it is you as the creator of those words?
yeah, I think the very basic way that I approach poetry or any other kind of creative writing is by going out into the natural world and either asking beings that I encounter there, or asking the land herself, asking a place. I start from the assumption that the land and all the creatures that we share the land with really do have things to communicate to us. You know, if we're talking about human history, humans have been Homo sapiens sapiens for the last 300,000 years. That number keeps getting pushed back. You know, a few years ago, it was only 100,000 years. Now it's 300,000 years. For the vast majority of those 300,000 years, we lived as traditional hunter-gatherers on the land. Virtually every traditional hunter-gatherer culture that we know of has insisted that the natural world can communicate with us, that the natural world is full of beings who are our literal kin, our family members. So I understand sort of in modernity now that when we talk like this, people think we're crazy or something. But it's actually crazy if you compare it to all of human history and the accumulated wisdom of humanity, to think that the natural world doesn't communicate with us. So I insist that the natural world communicates with me and with others. And I try and go out and ask the land, ask other beings, who are you and what do you need me to say? I want to write this poem. Do you want me to write something particular? Is there some lesson that you think that we need to know? I guess I'll also say that when I do that, I also try and be open to the possibility that maybe a poem, maybe writing isn't what the land needs at that moment. Maybe what the land needs is for me to put my body in front of the machines, and stop that. But almost every time when I go out and do that, something happens. Something either, either the clouds move and the sun shines somewhere, or the first evening star appears, or a Mormon cricket jumps out onto your foot. And I think it's a spiritual belief, but I believe that these are communications, and then when I go and sit down to write a poem, something, humans have never been able to understand or describe the muse, so to speak. I think that the muse is the natural world, and that if we sincerely want to be translators, that good things can happen. And so that's how I approach writing poems.
That reminds me a little bit about what Trebi's book, "The World is a Waiting Lover." You wrote it a few years ago now, Trebi, but maybe if you've read it, or if you haven't read it, I warmly recommend it to you. And it has that same aspect, which is that, that there's this personhood and that there's a communication. And I was wondering, you said, I can't, was it before we started recording, but you said, I wanted to communicate with people, not just legally and with the mind, but with the heart space. And then, that this falling in love with Thacker Pass. Has there ever been any communications that are not lovable, that are challenging, that are also part of this narrative that you're picking up from the natural world?
I think, and I need to be careful how I explain this. I believe that I believe that if we're created by the natural world and continually created, and we are expressions of the natural world, then that means I also think that things like the depression and anxiety that I experience are expressions of the natural world. I'm not trying to say that this is like a retribution from the natural world. But just like if you put an elephant in a cage and study their neurology, we now understand there's no question that elephants experience depression in much the same way as we do. And it's really easy for us to see that when you put an elephant in a cage, of course, that elephant, you remove that elephant from her natural habitat and put her in a cage, take her somewhere away from her natural habitat, remove her from her community, then it's really easy, I think, for us to kind of see biologically or ecologically, like, wow, that's pain. So we've removed ourselves from our natural habitat by and large. I mean, here I am sitting in a coffee shop surrounded by four walls, a roof overhead, the breeze isn't coming in. There are, other than maybe a few insects moving around, there are nothing but human creatures in here. And then think about things like cities, and the way so many of us live in asphalt and concrete and in buildings, spend most of our lives indoors. And we often wonder, why do we feel this deep anxiety? Why do we feel this depression? I think that these are part of the natural world, saying, look, I'm in pain. This pain that you're feeling is caused by what humans have done to me, have done to you. And so I really do, I think those things are expressions of the pain that the natural world feels. You know, we could expand this out to the fact that most illnesses that humans experience come from the fact that we domesticated animals that should have been wild, and in contact with those animals, you know, like the flu. I think flu is an expression from the natural world. Don't domesticate birds. And so yeah, I think that pain is there, and I think that we spend a lot of time trying to deny that pain, and that can be really problematic, and unhealthy.
Yeah. And having artistic creativity reflect that is actually part of finding and making beauty in wounded places. It really is. It's to say beauty is it's painful and it's there. So yeah, there's something very authentic and real about having that full spectrum, for sure. Trebi, have you got any questions before perhaps we ask Will to maybe read a bit of poetry if you're willing? Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great to hear some of your poems. There's something I was wondering about as I was reading your work and getting ready for this discussion, and that is you have encounters with the people who and the corporations, but behind the corporations there are human beings, and they may be the ones that are making the decisions, or they may be ones that are that are driving the bulldozers, whatever. So you deal with them both as an artist, writing from the point of view of the land and your relationship with the land. And you also are dealing with them as an attorney who's trying to protect these places. And I just kept wondering how you feel about these corporations and the people who are running them and doing their work. I mean, do you despise them? Are you angry with them? Do you hate them? Do you feel like they're misguided? Like what's going on emotionally with you with all of that as you've gone through these, if you've gone to these places where they want to do so much damage?
I guess I'll start with the less emotional side and explain that I feel like sometimes, or a lot of people take the position that somehow you know, these CEOs or these governmental decision makers or you know, stockholder boards and that kind of thing, like they're mistaken. They don't know what they're doing. I 100% believe that's incorrect. They know exactly what they're doing. They know their source of power. They know where their wealth comes from, and they know what they do to get that wealth. And in a lot of times, they know it much better than we do, because they have gained so much power and they want to protect the source of their power. And at the end of the day, the sort of raw power to force someone to do something else comes from controlling the natural world. This is you know, this is everything from the ability to build a nuclear bomb to the very first bronze axe heads that were developed to control forests in places like Europe and in other places. So because that's been my perspective, my experience, that they are not mistaken, they're not somehow like wrong, just not understanding things, that causes me a lot of anger. And I know that for a lot of people, anger is sort of not acceptable, or is you know, an emotion that we're just not supposed to feel or not allowed to feel. I always respond to that. You know, ask a mother grizzly bear if it's wrong that she feels anger when someone threatens her cubs. Ask a human mother if it's wrong to feel anger when someone threatens her children. And anger, like all emotions, again, are an expression of the natural world. And that anger exists there to protect, if we want to go very psychologically, someone like the great Hungarian Canadian Dr. Gabor Mate, maybe many people will be familiar with him. He says anger exists to protect boundaries. I think that's very true. So I do feel a lot of anger. I try, you know, I try not to let that anger dominate my behavior. But I think anger is an appropriate response to what's happening, and we need to be wise about how we direct that anger. But I don't think it's wrong to feel that.
Yeah, and there is this alchemy in anger. You know, the ideas, the examples that you give very clearly and viscerally reflect just that protective anger. And you know, it is a reflection of love. And I think that often that's sort of forgotten about when we're in the altercations, that anger can sometimes feel very fiery, but there's a reason for it, and that's love. And you know, it leads to then the question of where for you does the poetry assist you? The poetry that you create is, you've already mentioned, it is a reflection of the voices of the land, and then also you having a creative outlet for what is a huge burden, both emotionally, professionally, spiritually, that you're carrying for the land, as well as for many other people.
Yeah, you know, I think the world of metaphor and symbols and images is it's an even older world than the written word. You know, so the written word is something like between 8 and 10,000 years old. In fact, there's a lot of anthropologists that theorize that the first written word was actually to document slave logs, and agricultural crops. You needed to know how many crops people were producing in order to tax them. So that's where the first sort of written things came up. But there's a deeper, you know, the early cave paintings of our kin, the animals that humans were eating at the time. I find that in poetry I can access some of those places, and I suspect that that sort of symbology, those images, that metaphor, we might actually be more receptive to. Because we've been attached, we've experienced and lived with those images for much longer than we have the written word. But of course, we have the written word, and that you know, a lot of people go to the written word to understand their world. So that's poetry helps me kind of make sense of those things in a way that simply writing prose, like a legal argument, does not. And yeah, I pulled up a poem that I recently wrote that kind of exemplifies this. I don't know if this is the right time or not, but maybe if you would like me to read that, or at later on, I
Yeah,
can read it or something.
Please. This seems
please
like a good
do.
time.
Okay. So this poem is called Death Valley Before You Died. And Death Valley is, you know, one of the hottest places in the world. I was recently there. And this involves, I just want to explain a couple of the specific kind of images. I went pine nut picking while I was around there. And pine nut picking kind of served as a central metaphor for this. Death Valley Before You Died. Before Beatty, I never saw a truck flip like that. You shrugged, said, only coyotes do stupid shit like that. Your tongue was sweet with a warm wit. Your diagnoses quick. When you were diagnosed, I had never been hit like that. I didn't care if the visitor center thermometer read 124. Melanoma or no, I needed your skin. I never tasted sweat like that. We hid in the shade of an abandoned charcoal kiln. In cool ash and shadows, we said we'd always live like that. Before hard winters, you whispered, pinyon pines drop the most nuts. The heat made you weak, but I never saw you pick like that. Pine nuts are pine seeds. Little evergreen babies, you taught me. Help the trees make love, you said. I'd never thought about it like that. We did. Then you leaned on me all the way up Coffin Peak. When day gave up and died, you promised you'd never quit like that. Will you toast these and remember me, you asked, cracking shells with your teeth? We ate them raw together, and I still wish we could spit like that.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Thanks.
That's just stunning and so evocative of that fragility of life, actually. And how what you're saying about these thought changes. It's just lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it is. It just brings in so much life and the end of life and treasure and harvesting and losing. Really phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me a chance to read it.
So where's that? Have you published that poetry already, or is that something that's in the pipeline?
In
Give the
the
pun.
pipeline. In the stream, in the yeah. Yeah, I actually I always wanted to do this before I went to law school. So I decided now is the time, but I started what they call a low residency Master in Fine Arts. So an online program through Western Colorado University. It's really designed for working professionals. The faculty there are really committed to the natural world, there are indigenous faculty on staff, and I just felt like it was a really favorable place from my perspective. And I wrote that poem in a that poem's an example of what's called a ghazal, which is an ancient Arabic form that's sort of become, like something like the sonnet, just became sort of one of those forms that people use a lot of. But we had a form class teaching us all these traditional forms, and I wrote it there. And yeah, it's one that I felt like I said what I really meant to say in it.
Right. Yeah.
So going, I think again before we started recording, you said something really beautiful and impactful to me about, which I think I've mentioned, but that there's only so much you can reach people when you're talking legally and with your mind, and you also said that you were coming from that headspace, and then poetry opens up from your heart, and I wonder whether that's a happy relationship that you have within yourself, whether that's something that maybe is starting to move you and shift you into into a different way of being. What's it like having two expressions from two places in your body?
I feel so much joy when I stumble onto metaphors in poetry. When as any writer can know, writing is really hard. Writing can be a grind. You can write really hard for days and days, and nothing that really clicks really happens. But through writing poetry, when I kind of stumble into those metaphors, or some sort of image that I just hadn't considered before, kind of opens up. I find that to be one of the most joyful experiences in life. And also sort of, I think it sort of shows you the magic of the natural world. Um, and so as far as whether that's kind of changing my life, I think absolutely. It's helping me look for that magic, and perhaps try and work with that magic as a way to help people fall in love with the natural world, and then to act to help her. Um, but yeah, to write a poem, I think like it takes your whole psyche, your whole being, And I think the best poems are the ones that change you. You'll never be the same after you read a great poem or after you write a great poem.
And do they bleed into one another? Do you find poetry arises in your legal
Ah,
prose or vice versa?
great question.
Yeah, actually, it's sort of in different ways. Like one way is um, in poetry, at least the way I write it, you have to be I pay a lot of attention to sort of the flow of the image and how those images are presented within sort of maybe the narrative structure of a poem, and using that order of things to enhance the feeling of the poem or the message of the poem, if that's what we're talking about. And in legal arguments, I see opportunities for that too. Like maybe if I present this earlier or in a different way, um, that that could be more rhetorically persuasive. Um, and then so much of the law that I practice involves oral argument, involves litigation in court, and how you speak your arguments has as much to do with what you're actually arguing. And
Mm,
poetry, reading poetry out loud and thinking about the way that language sounds as you're writing it and as you're speaking it, it can enhance your public speaking in court.
mm. Wow. Maybe lawyers need to have at least one module of poetry discourse and presentation as part of their training.
I fully agree.
Yeah.
Joby, have you got
So,
any other questions? Maybe we can listen to another poem.
yeah, let's listen to another poem and then we have to stop and yeah, let's hear one more poem, Will, if you would.
Okay. Yeah, I'll read a little bit shorter one. This one is called Before Rose Petals Become Doe's Milk. I watched my grandmother smile while a thin doe ate her favorite rose bushes. Thorns pierced the doe's tongue. She bled, drop by drop, a scarlet clock measuring her time left. A thin doe ate her favorite rose bushes. My grandmother knew what grandmothers know. Drop by drop, a scarlet clock measures the time left before rose petals become doe's milk. My grandmother knew what grandmothers know. Doe's milk becomes two speckled fawns. Before rose petals become doe's milk, mothers must navigate many thorns. Doe's milk becomes two speckled fawns. My grandmother grew children like does and roses, because mothers must navigate many thorns, with faith that children bloom in many forms.
Oh,
That's incredible.
yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mm.
Well, Harry, you want to do a little closing and then I'll close the cafe.
Well, yeah, that is a beautiful place to close. It feels like a circular moment of petals becoming doe's milk and the continuation of life. A beautiful, beautiful place to end our conversation. Thank you so much, Will, for everything that you've shared. Is there anything that you'd like to share just now about how people can get in touch? Maybe any publications that they can buy, anything like that before we close?
Yeah, you can follow my work at willfalk.org. My last name is Falk. I'm on social media, Facebook and Instagram, just my name. My first collection of poetry, When I Set the Sweetgrass Down, was published by Wayfarer Books last year. If you Google When I Set the Sweetgrass Down and my name, you'll find a way to purchase it. And then, yeah, the last thing is you can follow the Thacker Pass campaign at protectthackerpass.org. Last year, I was sued along with several other Native folks and non-Native allies. And we are fundraising for legal costs. I'm not licensed in Nevada, so I can't represent everyone. So we have to pay a local Nevada lawyer. But protect thackerpass.org if you want to learn more about that campaign.
Thank you. Wonderful. Trebi, I'll hand over to you to close the cafe.
Well, I also thank you, Will, and to be a poet and an environmental attorney in this world just seems to me at this moment like the most perfect way to be a human being on earth. So thank you so much for doing both of those callings with such beauty and integrity. And our next Earth Exchange Cafe will be a little different. We're going to be speaking to Elizabeth Kaczynski, who's taking over the leadership of Radical Joy for Hard Times when I step down from directing it at the end of this month. Harry and I still will be continuing to do Earth Exchange Cafe. That will go on, but I will no longer be directing the organization. And she lives in Hawaii and has a full-time job, so we're going to be recording it a little early, so we don't have a specific date yet, but you will know. And now it is time to gently push our chairs back from our tables in the cafe. The music has been turned down. The lights are slowly dimming. There may be a few little dregs of tea or coffee or cocoa in your mug, but they're cold now because it's time to leave and to say goodbye to everyone who's here, to acknowledge all the art and the music and the recordings that are scattered about, and to leave and to come back next month. So for now, we thank Will Falk and my friend and co-host, Harry Sams, and we will see you next month.